4-H camp is a blast.
I think 4-H camp is cool.
The most awesome experience of your life.
4-H camp is awesome and really fun.
While at camp, you'll take an educational journey participating in hands-on tracks like science, engineering, and technology, water safety, outdoor skills, nutrition, and much, much more.
I think it was one of the most fun experiences I've ever had in my whole entire life.
4-H camp is life-changing.
So 4-H camp is an amazing, one-of-a-kind experience that you'll definitely want to have.
4-H camp is awesome.
My name is Bob Hines. My wife and I live on 28 acres in the little community of Bentley, Louisiana, Grant Parish. We enjoy being outside gardening. She loves her flowers. I do mainly the vegetable part of the gardening. We're very pleased to be part of the 4-H program this summer. We appreciate very much the work that 4-H does for our youth, very positive part of their lives. And we were very pleased to see that gardening was such an interesting spot for the youth coming up for this summer. And if you're interested in gardening, then you have to hear about this wonderful, beautiful stuff that we call compost. And that's what we'll be talking about today. I use compost all the time and talk about it. So I thought about if I had to give a definition for it, what would I say? So rather than take a chance of being wrong, I looked it up, and here's what it said. A mixture of various decaying organic substances used for fertilizing soil. Now, a mixture, there are several different things that goes into a compost pile. Decaying means it's going to be breaking down, of course, and organic means that it was once alive. What we do when we make our compost pile is actually copying nature. When you think about what goes on out in the woods, leaves fall off the trees year after year, eventually over a period of time break down. Even trees themselves fall to the ground and over a period of time will break down until all of it looks actually like it's gone back to the soil. So when we build our compost pile, we're actually copying nature, and the thing about it, the way we use materials, put them together, and the way that we work the pile, we can make things happen on a much faster scale than what nature does out in the woods. If you want compost fast, you would make one called hot compost pile. They are cold, but the hot type gives you faster compost, usable compost. And you do that by using materials, brown materials that are normally things like leaves. You can use, people sometimes use shredded paper, even cardboard torn up to go into your compost pile. I use primarily leaves as my carbon source. Anything brown will be the carbon. You want nitrogen to be part of your pile. That's called green, and this is where things like grass clippings come in. And the thing about all these materials that go into your compost pile, all around you, you don't have to go and buy material. So things are available from outside, things are available from inside your house, mainly the kitchen, and we'll talk about some of these things. But as you use all these materials, it also keeps things out of the landfill, which is important. Sometimes if you drive around, and our closest large town is Alexandria, there are communities who collect their leaves, put them in bags, wait for the trash man to come and pick them up. That's a valuable resource, really wasted, plus it adds to the landfill. So we can make use of all these things and help along that line. If we think about the carbon materials, I use, as I said, my main source are leaves. everything that goes into your compost pile really works better if it's broken down into smaller pieces. I've been doing this a long time, like doing it, and I'll keep on doing it as long as I can. So I invested in a shredder grinder, run my leaves through, and they wind up in very small pieces. Not everyone's going to do that. You don't need to have expensive equipment to do this. You can even use your leaves whole if you want to. You just need to be aware that it'll take a longer period of time for your things to break down. I like to start out with my carbon source, the leaves, and I have some on the ground here. Anytime that you start your compost pile, you also want to have that moist. So if I were building this pile, I would make sure that my carbon is moist. You don't want it soggy. You just want enough moisture there so that it's like, if you think of a sponge, wet but wrung out, just damp. And the thing that I would put on next would be my nitrogen source. I would take these grass clippings that I got when I mowed yesterday, make another layer. Now these already have a good bit of moisture. You can feel the heat from these clippings from yesterday, because that's what we want. We want our pile to heat up. And even though they are a little bit wet, we would add a little bit of moisture. Then I like to alternate again with my carbon layer. I would put another layer of leaves on. Make sure it's damp. Now this takes care of things that you can collect from outside. You think about things from the kitchen, you can have banana peels, coffee grounds, eggshells, any of your vegetable peelings that are left over. The things you want to avoid in your compost pile are things like meat, fat, and bones. You want to leave those out. I have a collection here of some things. As you see when I put them on, I have eggshells, banana peels, some pears that are no longer usable, have some tomatoes that are not usable anymore, a large amount. These need to be chopped up some, so I just take my shovel, break them down a little bit, make sure they're on here. If they mix up with your leaves, that's great. The things that you bring out of your kitchen like this, also a nitrogen source. So again, we have our layer of carbon, layer of nitrogen, layer of carbon, and then another layer of nitrogen. That was damp, so we don't need too much water on it. Just make sure it's damp. And then finally, I like to finish off with the last carbon layer. And you want to keep that damp. We built our basic compost pile. If you were to come back in 24 hours, put your hand on the surface, you should feel some heat, and that's what you want. It'll heat up for a week or 2 weeks, then the heat will start going down. At that point, you'll want to take a shovel or anything you can to turn your pile. This is going to mix everything together, let you add more moisture, and let air and oxygen in. When you do that, it'll start heating up again. Not as much as it did the first time. And then it'll heat will go down again. At that point, you'll turn it again. You may have to turn it about 4 times until you have your finished compost. When that's done, you can let it sit 2 or 3 days. Should be ready to use in your vegetable garden or your flowers. Now, you don't have to worry about your compost pile smelling bad. It just doesn't happen. I think the heat that you produce helps take care of that. The only smell I've had with a pile is when I used a large amount of grass clippings, and you know how they smell when you smell from people mowing their yard. But I think the heat made them smell a little bit stronger, but that was not a bad smell, and it only lasted a couple of days. It just smelled like a strong smell of grass clippings. In our last segment, we saw how a compost pile goes together, alternating the carbon and nitrogen. Back behind here is one that I've had going for a while, and when I first put this pile together, the temperature here, and this compost thermometer has a long probe that goes down into the pile that helps me be aware of the temperature on down in the center of the pile. When I first put this one together, it got up to 160 degrees. Now, I know when to turn this when my temperature goes down to 80 degrees, because the microorganisms in there aren't working as much anymore, maybe need some oxygen, and I know that it's time to turn it. So what you want to do, all this material that's on the outside, you want to put it aside and make sure that it goes to the inside of the pile when you turn it. Everything that's to the inside will be on the outside. And after I turned it the last time, it's now down to 110 degrees. And I'll wait for it to get down to 80. This will be the second time that I've turned it. It'll build up again, but probably not as much next time. But when it does get back down to 80 degrees again, I will turn it once more. If you don't have a thermometer like this, you can actually feel the warmth on the outside, but if you want to really check how warm it is, you have to go down toward the center. It really gets hot. Sometimes you can even have steam coming out from the heat in the center. But you'll just have to judge by your touch about your temperature. When you know that it's not as hot as it was, then you can go ahead, turn your pile, add moisture if you need to, and that will let more oxygen in for the microbes to feed on and heat up again. This compost pile is called the finished compost. It's gone through all the steps that this one over here has, been through its heat and turned several times, so it is ready to be used. Now this is a personal preference that I like to do. Not everyone needs to do this, but I built a screen with a frame that fits over my wheelbarrow, hardware cloth with 1/2-inch mesh. And the reason I like to screen it is to break up any lumps that might be in there. It seems to make it go a little further. I never have enough compost and always trying to get more. But what I do to help break this up, before I use it in the vegetable garden rows, or my wife uses it in her flowers, just take shovelfuls, run it through the screen like this. Sometimes there are earthworms in here. I have to help through the holes, but that's good. I want them in my garden row. Another thing this screening does, if there's anything that hasn't quite broken down yet, it'll stay on top of the screen, and I can put it back in a pile that's still working. We don't waste anything. So once this is all through, this also helps make it easier to spread. And as you can see, there's some things that don't break down quite as well. So I'll put this over here and let it compost more. So that what I have is just a real good, fine compost mix. I think it works better to go out on the garden road. I have just put up some posts with some wire. Sometimes when you bring your material in, you need something just to contain it. And it helps keep it in place when you turn it, because it does take a good bit of room to turn your pile. All right, we have come from our finished compost pile. We've screened it, and I get some. The way I use it in my garden row is just to take the square point shovel and come along and put it out until it's about an inch thick. I do this all the way down the row, and then I'll have something to plant in. If some of the benefits of using this compost in your garden row, number one, to me, I'm feeding my soil. There's a saying in organic gardening, if you feed your soil will feed you. If you take up each teaspoon of soil, there will be billions of little microbes in your soil, and they love organic material like your compost. And as they eat the compost, go through their life processes, they're constantly enriching your soil. Of course, they're much too small to be seen, but an organism that can be seen, and I love seeing in my garden rows, are earthworms. They really like things like the compost. They are attracted to compost, and as they move through the soil, the spaces they leave let in air and water, and that's beneficial to the roots of your plants. And the castings they leave behind are some of the world's best fertilizer, and they're happy, you're happy, so it's win-win. Another benefit of compost, if this should be really hard packed soil, you can use compost worked into it to help loosen up that soil. And as we talked about before, as you add this, the microbes are feeding on it, it's attracting earthworms, so everything together is just a building process for your soil. Another good thing about compost is that it's more sponge-like. It holds moisture very well. So when it's mixed in your soil and holding moisture, especially if you have a layer of mulch on top of it, you're really conserving moisture in your soil. And water is one of those resources that we need to be very careful about these days and using wisely. So those are some of the main benefits of compost. It's ongoing. It's just a constant building up of your soil in your vegetable garden or your flowers. It works equally well in both. We make use of all the leaves on our property that we can get hold of. We rake them. My Zero Turn has a collector on it that we can collect them. Any way we can use these leaves. And of course, as we get them, they're whole like this. And I've mentioned a while ago my shredder grinder. I have put them in a pile out here. As I can get to them, I run these whole leaves through the shredder grinder, and they're used for several different things. I use them in the compost pile. We use them for mulch in flower beds. Use them for mulch in the garden, and since they're broken down, in small pieces, they break down so much easier after they're ground through the shredder grinder. This is what the leaves look like after they go through the shredder grinder. As you can see down in here, after they've sat here a while, you can see the moisture in them, but they are much smaller pieces and help them break down much better and hold the moisture. As I said before, you do not have to have one of these. You can use your lawnmower to run over your leaves. You can even use them whole if you have to. Just be aware that it'll take a little more time for them to break down in your pile if you do that. So I hope your interest in gardening and composting continues and that you're very successful in all you do.